They say that if you walk the abandoned grounds of Blackwater Plantation after dark, you can still hear the shutters slam, though the house has been empty for more than a century. But on the night of July 3, 1891, something far worse than wind moved through its halls. The mistress of the estate, Eleanor Vang, was found missing from her locked bedroom. Her dress was torn. Her windows unbroken. Her bed cold. And on the floor, smeared into the old cypress boards, was a symbol no one recognized. But one man whispered a name he wasn't supposed to utter. "She's back." By morning, town officials sealed the plantation. They didn't search. They didn't question. They simply burned every journal, ledger, and letter they found. Because this wasn't the first disappearance at Blackwater. And deep inside the story of that cursed house lived a woman erased from official records, a woman the locals only ever called the Abomination. A woman who had once been enslaved there, and who, mysteriously, rose to become mistress of the plantation itself. Tonight, we are reopening the archive they tried to destroy. Because the truth about Blackwater Plantation was not buried. It was contained, barely. And those who tried to suppress it met the same fate. They vanished. This is the story of the woman who should never have existed. And the night she returned. Blackwater Plantation never officially recorded her birth. The courthouse ledger skipped from one year to the next, as if entire pages had been torn out. But a forgotten family Bible, found decades later inside a collapsed smokehouse, held a single clue. On a yellowed page, written in the trembling hand of the plantation's first overseer, were 4 words. "She is not human." Scholars dismissed it as superstition. But the line below it chilled every historian who saw it. "And she will inherit us all." The overseer, John J. Brevins, was known for his precision. His meticulous notes tracked births, punishments, rations, and deaths. Yet between 1837 and 1845, his entries grew erratic. Words repeated. Sentences abruptly ended. And in the margins, crude drawings of spirals, thick, dark coils, appeared again and again, circling one name. Marrow. No last name. No origin. Just Marrow. A name that returns throughout Blackwater's history like a pulse. But what terrified researchers most wasn't the name itself. It was the fact that Brevins' handwriting changed when he wrote it. Slanted. Jagged. Almost carved. As if, while documenting her, he was no longer entirely in control of his own hand. Then in 1846, his entries stopped completely. His body was found a month later, hanging from the rafters of the cotton gin, eyes open, mouth twisted, pointing at a symbol scrawled above him in ash. The same symbol found in Eleanor Vanga's room in 1891. Something wasn't just wrong at Blackwater. Something was shaping it. According to plantation lore, kept alive only through whispered, half-remembered oral stories, Marrow did not arrive by purchase, birth, or transfer. She was simply found. One summer morning, after a violent storm tore through the parish, the slaves discovered a cradle-like bundle at the edge of the swamp. It wasn't cloth. It wasn't wood. It was something between bark and skin, soft, fibrous, pulsing faintly like something alive. Inside it lay a newborn girl. Quiet. Watching. Not crying. She was given to the nursery women, who reported that the infant never blinked when handled. Never whimpered. Never slept longer than a few minutes at a time. But she watched, always watched. As if cataloging everything. Within months, rumors spread of strange changes around her. Lamps dimmed when she entered a room. Dogs refused to cross her path. Infants nearby fell ill for no medical reason. And most disturbing of all, the older slaves claimed that Marrow's eye color shifted depending on who held her, gray, amber, pitch black. When the master, Horace Blackwater, ordered her to be baptized, the pastor refused. He said no child born of God could look at him with such ancient, knowing disdain. The pastor left the plantation that same night. His horse was found days later wandering the woods. But he was never seen again. Merrow was raised without a record, without a mother, without a past. But Blackwater's downfall began the day she learned to speak. It happened in the scullery, according to the oldest surviving testimonial. Merrow, now around 6 years old, sat alone near the hearth, turning the handle of a rusted kettle, slowly, rhythmically. A young cook named Janice approached her, asking gently whether she was hungry. Merrow looked up, tilted her head, and replied in a voice that startled everyone in the kitchen. "No, but you are." The words were unsettling enough, but it was the tone, calm, mature, hollow, that froze Janice in place. That same night, Janice suffered a violent seizure and never walked again. In her final years she repeated the same thing to anyone who would listen. Her voice wasn't a child's voice. It wasn't a voice at all. It was something learning to sound human. Merrow didn't speak again for months. But people heard her. At the edge of their dreams. In the ringing of the dinner bell. In hushed murmurs coming from the pantry when no one was inside. She spoke in tones that made little sense, describing things she shouldn't have known. Where the overseer hid his ledger. When the cotton crop would fail. Which slave would try to run, and when he'd be caught. Horace Blackwater became obsessed. He moved her into the main house. He personally supervised her education, reading, diction, music. And soon the quiet girl who shouldn't have existed became the master's secret prize. The plantation began calling her something else. The master's little mistress. And that was only the beginning. Horace Blackwater, a man consumed by lineage and legacy, believed Merrow possessed an intellect that could elevate the entire estate. Tutors were brought in, strict men from Charleston and Savannah, experts in rhetoric, theology, and classical languages. Every one of them resigned within weeks. One tutor, Reverend Amos Dillon, reported that Merrow translated Latin texts she had never seen. Another said she recited entire paragraphs of scripture he had not yet taught her. A third claimed she displayed an impossible knowledge of historical events as if recollecting them rather than learning them. But their resignations were not the most disturbing part. 2 tutors fell mysteriously ill within days of leaving Blackwater. One died in convulsions. The other fled the state entirely, abandoning his family. Still, Horace pressed forward, consumed by a belief that Merrow was not cursed, but gifted. He allowed her full access to the plantation library, containing generations of Blackwater journals, occult sermons, and ancient maritime texts. Merrow devoured them. Night after night, lights flickered in her room as she read aloud in dead languages, her voice echoing like 2 voices overlapping. Servants refused to go near her door. By age 12, her presence dominated the house. By 13, she had the full attention of Horace Blackwater. By 14, she had something more dangerous. His obedience. Witnesses later said it wasn't seduction, it was influence. She could bend the master's will like wet wood. And the plantation began to rot under her command. If there is one night the remaining descendants of Blackwater refuse to discuss, it is the night of the gathering, a secret meeting between Horace Blackwater and 6 powerful men from neighboring plantations. They arrived under moonless skies, guided to the manor by lanterns dimmer than usual, as if the night smothered their flame. They came, records suggest, to address a rumor spreading across the parish. That Horace intended to name Merrow, an adolescent girl with no recorded origin, as his legal heir. This was not merely unusual. It was impossible. It was madness. Yet witnesses described seeing Horace sit at the head of the long oak table, pale and shaking, hands trembling uncontrollably. Merrow stood behind him, silent, her presence filling the room like a cold draught. The men argued. Shouted. Demanded reason. And then the screaming began. Only one witness survived long enough to give an account, an elderly carriage driver who saw flickering silhouettes through the dining room windows. He reported seeing the men convulse violently, their shadows twisting and stretching unnaturally across the walls. He described hearing a voice, not Merrow's, but something larger, speaking in a language that bent the air itself. When the doors finally opened, Horace Blackwater walked out alone. The 6 men were never seen again. And from that night on, everyone at Blackwater understood. Merrow was not merely the master's protégé. She was his replacement. His mistress in title, if not in name. After the gathering, Horace Blackwater changed. Witnesses noted that his once commanding posture collapsed into something hunched and fearful. He deferred to Merrow in all matters, estate management, finances, even punishment decrees. The staff whispered that he no longer slept in his master bedroom but in a small storage room near the cellar, as if hiding from something inside his own house. Meanwhile, Merrow, only in her mid-teens, took her place at the head of the plantation as if ascending to a throne she had always been destined for. She walked the property with an eerie calm, hands behind her back, eyes always half-lidded as if listening to something no one else could hear. And the land responded. Crops that had suffered years of drought suddenly flourished. Horses that had gone lame walked again within days. The plantation's profits soared, and families from nearby counties came to study Blackwater's miraculous recovery. But the miracles came with a price. Random livestock deaths. Sudden storms localized only over the estate. Employees found sleepwalking into the fields at night. Children developing fevers that made them mutter Merrow's name in their dreams. Still, no one dared challenge her authority. Horace Blackwater had become an empty shell, trailing behind her like a servant. Documents from the period show that he relinquished all ownership of the land, transferring everything to her. Yet legally, she remained a girl with no surname, no birth, no origin. People no longer called her Merrow. They called her what they feared she had become. The Mistress of Blackwater. And darkness followed her reign. In 1873, a set of handwritten notes was discovered inside a broken trunk during repairs to the overseer's cabin. The papers belonged to Horace Blackwater, his final writings before his disappearance. They detailed something he called the spiral doctrine. He claimed Merrow had taught it to him over several nights, though he insisted her mouth never moved while she spoke. Instead, he heard her words directly behind his eyes. The doctrine centered on a single symbol. A spiral drawn counterclockwise, jagged at the edges, thick at the center. The same symbol found on the floor of Eleanor Venga's room years later. But the doctrine was not a religion. It was a set of instructions. Pages described how reality could be bent if one surrendered their will. How nature responded to structure. How human minds were lattices waiting to be rewired. Most chilling were the passages describing inheritance. To be chosen is to be hollowed. To inherit is to lose oneself. She will empty those who resist. And fill those who kneel. Horace wrote that Merrow was preparing something. That she was grooming the land, reshaping its people, carving the plantation into a vessel. He begged whoever found the notes to burn the estate to the ground. 2 days after writing his final entry, Horace Blackwater disappeared. Witnesses claimed his shadow remained in the main hall for days after. A dark stain shaped like a man frozen in fear. One thing was certain. Merrow had mastered more than the plantation. She had mastered the minds within it. Following Horace's disappearance, a new overseer was hired, Abner Roach, a brutal man with a reputation for breaking labor strikes with terrifying efficiency. Locals hoped he would restore order to Blackwater. Instead, the estate consumed him. Roach entered the manor confident, arrogant, certain no teenage girl could intimidate him. But within days, he reportedly refused to speak Merrow's name. Servants noticed him scratching spirals into the dirt with the heel of his boot. He avoided mirrors. he stopped eating. On the 6th night, 2 stable hands heard him screaming in the loft of the barn. When they found him, he was slashing the air with his whip, at something they couldn't see, shouting, "Get out of my head! Get out! Get out!" He collapsed shortly after, trembling violently on the dirt floor. Roach survived, but awoke unable to recognize faces. He claimed everyone around him appeared as hollow silhouettes filled with smoke. He left the plantation soon after, muttering that Marrow had folded his thoughts like paper. He died a week later in a distant parish. His final words, recorded by the attending doctor. "The spiral is inside me." Marrow didn't need physical force. Her power was psychological, intimate, invasive, complete. The plantation no longer feared her wrath. They feared her attention. And the more she was feared, the stronger she seemed to grow. Children were the first to sense the true danger. They spoke of seeing Marrow in their dreams, watching from the corners of rooms they had never visited. Toddlers whose families lived miles away from the plantation began drawing spirals in the dirt. School records from the nearby parish showed a dozen children reporting the same nightmare. A woman standing at the foot of their bed, whispering, "You belong here." Parents attempted prayer circles, exorcisms, herbal cures, nothing stopped the dreams. For some children, the nightmares escalated into sleepwalking. They were found wandering toward the plantation at night, barefoot, eyes open but unseeing. One mother, Marlene Hatch, physically chained her son to his bed frame. The next morning, she found the chain still locked. But the child gone. He was discovered at the edge of the Blackwater fields, humming a tune no one recognized. This was the turning point. Locals began calling Marrow a collector. Someone who didn't steal children's bodies, but their minds. Their futures. The children described her as calm, patient, loving even. But only in the way a drowning sea might embrace its victims. The elders warned the parish leaders to take action, but fear kept everyone silent. Blackwater Plantation had become more than cursed. It had become a gravitational force, pulling the vulnerable into its orbit. And Marrow stood at the center. Unblinking. Waiting. By the spring of 1882, fear surrounding Blackwater Plantation had reached the parish board. Families petitioned for an official inquiry, citing disappearances, unexplained illnesses, and the growing number of children waking in the night whispering Marrow's name. Reluctantly, the board agreed. A small team of parish officials arrived at the plantation at dawn. Marrow greeted them at the steps of the manor, dressed in a simple black gown that looked older than the house itself. She smiled softly, almost knowingly, and invited them inside. But none of them recalled crossing the threshold. Their journals, recovered years later, contained only fragmented impressions. A long hallway with too many doors. A staircase they climbed but never descended. Whispers echoing from behind the wallpaper. A dining room where a place was already set for each of them. One official described looking into a mirror and seeing himself much older, frail, sunken-eyed, wearing clothes he didn't own. The meeting ended abruptly, though none of the officials agreed on how or when. They left with no clear conclusions except one statement written unanimously in their report. Do not return. But 3 members of the inquiry failed to show up for work the next day. Their families later found their clothes folded neatly on their beds. Their bodies were never recovered. The parish board sealed the report and buried all documentation. Blackwater became a forbidden subject in public records. And Marrow remained untouched. Silent, composed, and impossibly patient. In the winter of 1883, something changed on the plantation. For nearly 3 months, no one entered or left the estate. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No carriages traveled the road. The fields froze under a cold sharper than any in parish memory. Yet at night, neighbors swore they saw lights moving silently across the property, cold, bluish glows sweeping the fields like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Then came the smell. A sharp, metallic scent drifted into the surrounding woods, carried by the wind. Hunters described it as the smell of cold iron and wet earth. Dogs refused to go near the property. Birds vacated their nests. Even insects vanished from the area, leaving the plantation in an unnatural stillness. Those who dared approach the house during this silent winter reported hearing a faint humming, an endless, low vibration that rattled in their bones. Some claimed it was coming from the ground itself. No one knows precisely what happened inside the manor during those months, because no human witness survived long enough to recount it. But when spring arrived, the snow around Blackwater melted in perfect concentric rings. As if shaped intentionally. As if the ground itself had been rearranged. And when the first worker was sent to check the estate, he found Merrow alone at the dining table, calmly eating an apple. Everyone else was gone. Not dead. Not escaped. Gone. Rumors spread that Horace Blackwater, missing for nearly a decade, had returned. But the figure who arrived at the plantation one fog-drenched evening was not the man anyone remembered. Witnesses at the crossroads described him as gaunt, with skin stretched too tightly across his skull, and eyes that reflected no torchlight. His boots left no prints in the mud. He moved like someone practicing the memory of walking rather than performing it naturally. He did not knock on the manor door. Merrow opened it for him. The two stood silently in the doorway, facing one another. Some insisted they saw Horace bow his head in submission. Others said Merrow touched his face tenderly, like greeting a long-lost lover. But the most unnerving testimony came from a constable who claimed Horace's shadow was not attached to his feet. It lagged several inches behind him, delayed, distorted. What happened inside the house remains unknown. But by morning, Horace Blackwater was sitting at the head of the dining table once more, staring blankly ahead, lips moving with no sound. Merrow sat beside him, her expression serene. Residents said Blackwater felt different after the heir's return. As if the land itself was holding its breath. And that night, the glow returned to the fields. Brighter. Hungrier. It seemed whatever Merrow had been preparing was almost ready. By the summer of 1885, spiral carvings began appearing across the parish. First on the trunks of cypress trees. Then on barn doors. Then carved into the ground so deeply the soil refused to regrow anything for months. Farmers who attempted to erase the symbols woke with severe migraines, vomiting, and, in some cases, bleeding from the nose and ears. A doctor who examined the carvings later described feeling pulled forward, as if gravity itself tilted toward the plantation. The spirals pointed inward, always toward Blackwater. Experts from New Orleans were brought in to examine them. They left the next morning without explanation, refusing to speak of what they saw. Only one scholar, a linguist from the city, left behind a single note before his abrupt departure. These symbols are not meant to be read. They are meant to be obeyed. Merrow's influence had grown beyond the plantation. The parish was no longer simply living near Blackwater. They were orbiting it. And the spirals were a warning. Or an invitation. The only detailed first-hand account of Merrow's power came from Eliza Harrow, a widow who had lost her son during the silent winter. She arrived at the plantation in a state of grief-driven rage, demanding answers. To everyone's shock, Merrow allowed her inside. Eliza described the manor as impossibly altered, hallways longer than they should be, portraits whose eyes shifted when she passed, a cold that felt deliberate, following her from room to room. Merrow led her to the parlor and spoke plainly. "Your son is not dead. He is becoming." Eliza said. Merrow's face shifted subtly, as if lit from beneath by an unseen light. Her voice echoed in a way that didn't match the room. When Eliza asked what becoming meant, Merrow reached out and gently touched her forehead. Eliza screamed. She said she saw visions, Endless spirals made of people's memories, the plantation's history folding into itself, and Marrow standing at the center, not as a woman, but as something ancient wearing a human shape. When Eliza awoke, she was lying outside the plantation gates. Her hair had turned completely white. She left the parish that night and spent the rest of her life warning anyone who would listen. She's not from here. She's here to reshape here. Her testimony was dismissed as madness. But nothing she said contradicted what was already happening. Blackwater's influence spread faster than fear could contain it. Livestock died in patterns shaped like spirals. Wells turned brackish overnight. Families reported waking up in different rooms than the ones they fell asleep in. Clocks stopped. Churches emptied. No one trusted anyone. The parish economy collapsed as workers refused to approach the plantation. Schools shut down. Farmers abandoned their fields. A quiet migration began, with families leaving under the cover of night. The sheriff organized a final armed intervention, 12 men sworn to confront whatever was happening inside Blackwater. They approached the property on horseback. Only the horses came back. Their saddles were empty. Their reins had been severed cleanly, as though cut by something sharper than any blade. The sheriff's badge was later found at the edge of the plantation road, bent into the shape of a spiral. From that moment on, the parish was effectively dead. A map from the era shows the entire region marked with a single word. Deserted. And at the center of that void remained the plantation. Thriving despite the silence surrounding it. As if feeding on it. The last recorded event at Blackwater occurred on July 3, 1891, the night Eleanor Vang vanished. She was one of the few remaining residents brave enough, or desperate enough, to investigate the plantation, hoping to find a missing sister who had wandered 2 close months earlier. Eleanor entered the manor just before nightfall. Neighbors saw lights flicker wildly inside the house, like lanterns swinging in a storm. They heard faint chanting, repetitive, rhythmic, rising and falling like breath. When the lights suddenly died, the parish went silent. At dawn, Eleanor's bedroom was found in perfect condition except for the symbol carved into the floorboards and the imprint of her body on the mattress, still warm. The windows were locked from the inside. Her shoes were neatly placed by the bed. Her journal lay open to a single sentence. She showed me the future and took my past. Eleanor became the last confirmed disappearance. With her, Blackwater's story should have ended. But the house did not decay. The crops did not wither. The spiral never stopped growing. Something inside the plantation was still awake. When federal authorities finally arrived decades later, they found the manor intact, dustless, spotless, as if abandoned only hours earlier. The dining table was set for 2, plates polished, chairs pulled out. As if Horace and Marrow had just stepped away. But there were no bodies. No personal belongings. No signs of struggle. Just absence. Investigators reported severe headaches while inside the house. Some became disoriented, unable to remember their own names for several minutes. One agent heard a woman humming upstairs. No one was upstairs. The team left after only 4 hours, sealing the house and declaring it structurally unsound, though no structural weakness was ever recorded. The plantation was never reclaimed. Never auctioned. Never touched. Because those who entered left with an unshakable certainty. Blackwater was not empty. It was waiting. In the decades that followed, surveyors noted a strange pattern in the land surrounding the plantation, trees growing in curved lines, vines wrapping around trunks in perfect spirals, even streams bending subtly toward the manor. The entire region had reshaped itself. A geologist studying the area claimed the mineral composition of the soil formed a massive, unfinished spiral, miles wide, centered precisely on the plantation. His report ended with a chilling observation. Whatever began here is incomplete. Locals who dared visit the site often reported the same sensation. A pull. A beckoning. A soft whisper at the base of the skull urging them closer. Most turned back. A few didn't. Their cars were found abandoned along the road, doors open, keys still in the ignition. The spiral, it seemed, was still growing. Still waiting for its final piece. And Marrow, if she ever truly left, remained its architect. Today, Blackwater Plantation sits at the center of a region known simply as the Hollow Parish, a place erased from most maps and ignored by state authorities. The manor still stands, untouched by weather or time, windows unbroken, doors locked from the inside. No animals approach it. No plants grow within several yards of the foundation. And at night, locals swear they see a dim light drifting from window to window, as though someone is walking the halls, checking each room, waiting. The legend says Marrow never died. That she stepped into the spiral she created. That she became its voice. A voice that still calls out to anyone who listens too closely. Historians dismiss it all as superstition. A rural myth. A cautionary tale. But official records surrounding the plantation remain mysteriously sealed. Families tied to Blackwater refuse to discuss it. And every attempt to demolish the manor has ended in sudden, violent storms. Some stories are forgotten for a reason. Some houses remain standing because something inside them never left. And if you ever find yourself near the old parish road, and you feel a pull, a pressure behind your eyes urging you closer, turn back. Because the Mistress of Blackwater is still waiting. And the spiral is never finished.